for being here for pest management strategies for dragon fruit. My name is Jeff Washulewski. I'm the commercial tropical fruit extension agent for University of Florida IFAS and Miami-Dade Extension. Here's our what we're going to be looking at today. I'll be giving a brief introduction, and then Pam Dutra will be talking about pruning for disease control. Romina Gazis will be talking about current disease control recommendations. Daniel Carrillo will be talking about insect pests and beneficials. Jonathan Crane will be talking about additional cultural practices to reduce insect and disease issues. And then we're going to do a survey, and then we're going to talk about CUs. If you don't know what CUs are, you don't need to worry about. If you do, you need to worry about them. And then we're going to do a Q&A, and we're going to do that through the chat. So you're going to be muted, and we'll do the Q&A through the chat. So a little housekeeping. We're going to give you one ag tree crop CU. Ag tree crop CUs are hard to get. And the way you're going to get that is this. At the end of the session, you're going to email me and tell me that you attended. At that point, and you're going to email me using the email that you signed up with. You're going to give me your name. I'll have the email. Then I will look up that you attended. I can see how many minutes that you attended. If you were here for the whole time, I will send you the CU form. I'll put your name in it, and that's how you get it, okay? There's my email. You should already have it. If you don't, it's sflhort@ufl.edu. I'll put that up at the end as well. I'll put it in the chat at the end as well. So you'll be muted. Your camera is off, so there's no funny business. At the end, I'm going to put in the chat as well a list of pesticides for dragon fruit. Those are the ones that are labeled. So that means those are the ones that are legal for dragon fruit. If they're not legal, or if they're not labeled for dragon fruit, you cannot put them on dragon fruit. They're not legal. Some of them are going to be restricted pesticides. What that means is if you don't have a pesticide license, you cannot put them on dragon fruit. And also the label is the law, meaning whatever it says on the label on that pesticide, you have to do that. If it says you have to wear a certain amount of gear, you have to wear that. If you don't, you're breaking the law. And at the end of this workshop seminar, we're going to give you a very brief survey. I'm going to put a link in the chat. You're going to click on that, and then you're going to take maybe 5 questions. You're going to do it real quick, and we're going to keep you captive. And then at that point, once you do that, then you can talk to the experts doing the Q&A through the chat, okay? So brief introduction to dragon fruit, also called pitaya. So botany overview. It's a perennial vine cacti capable of growing up to 20 feet. It's triangular, 3-sided, sometimes 4 to 5, jointed, many branch stems. Here you see on the right, someone's growing it on rebar. And it's jointed, many branch stems. Vines have aerial roots which adhere to the surface, and its flowering is induced by long days. So this is kind of why we're doing this workshop now. If you've noticed, the last couple weeks, the days are getting longer. So we're kind of, they're starting to get towards that point. Back to botany again, the flowers are bisexual. They're large. They're also beautiful. They're white or pink. They're fragrant. They're nocturnal. They're bell-shaped. The pulp, you see at the bottom there, it can be white, it can be yellow, it can be red. The seeds are very small and they're numerous. You would eat them. There on the right, you see a very tall plant, and you probably don't want to let them get that tall because it's going to be more difficult to harvest. The flowers can open in the night, also early morning. There's a cross section of the vine. and there's an open flower. They open more than that. There's a mature fruit there, and that one, you see, it's a little longer. Typically, when they're longer like that, they have the white flesh. There's an immature fruit, the bottom left, and the bottom right there. When they're a little stubbier like that, they typically have red flesh. There you see the fruit. It's kind of longer, and it has the white flesh. There's a scientific name. Comes from Colombia, Ecuador, or it's grown in Colombia, Ecuador, Israel. Excellent quality, pulp, self-compatible, meaning the flower can pollinate itself, or partial to self-incompatibility. So might need to be hand pollinated. That could be a problem grown commercially. And that cultivar there is Soul Kitchen. Here's two more. See, these are more stubby and they're red. Now here's a yellow one. This is thought to have very good quality flavor, and I haven't seen it in South Florida, but I've heard growers say that they have grown this in South Florida. So again, see you at the end. Once we get to the end where Dr. Crane is finished, then I will tell you how to get the CU. I'll put the pesticide list, very good list that Dr. Crane has put together. And then some of them are restricted, remember. Label is the law, remember. I've said that a million times in all my classes. And then we'll do the survey. I'll keep you captive. And then we'll do the Q&A. Okay? So our next speaker is Pam Dutra, and she's going to talk about pruning for disease control.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pamela. I'm postdoc here at the University of Florida. And first of all, thanks for being here today. And today I'm going to talk about an important and essential practice, but sometimes overlooked, that can make a big difference in maintaining your plant's health and improve your yield. So today I'm going to talk about pruning for disease management. Sorry. So first, I want to ask you a question. You don't need to answer, but think about, so do you believe that more clados per plant means higher yield? It's reasonable if you think when we have more clados in the plant, you have more photosynthetic area, we have more buds, then more flowers, then more fruits. But also I want you to think that when we have more clados, we also increase competitions for nutrients, water, and sunlight. For instance, damaged stems or weak stems, you waste plants' resource to maintenance. Instead, the plants spend this resource into fruit production. So that's when the pruning came in, and why is important you pruning your plants. So when you prune your plants, you can improve your yield because you can balance these resources to go to fruit production. Instead, then you spend this resource in support this excessive growth. The second benefit of pruning is that you improve the sunlight exposure, and this means that you improve the carbs production and then improve your fruit sweetness and Brix. So when you prune correctly, you also will improve your fruit quality. And another benefit of pruning is that you can improve fungicide efficacy by improving the fungicide penetration in the canopy. So if you have an overcrowded canopy, the fungicides you might not perform it well because you not reach all the plant's part. And last but not least, you can also improve the air circulation in the canopy, reducing humidity, moisture, and these are favorable conditions to the disease development. So when you have the pruning correctly, you can avoid diseases, fungal and bacterial diseases by providing this better air circulation. So this is not just my opinion. Actually, the benefit of pruning is well established in the literature. For instance, this is an example of a paper that the authors tested different levels of pruning. Here is the control, the non-pruned plants, and all the pruning intensity that they test, they saw that they have more new sprouts and also more fruitful cladodes. We have a optimal level here that was the moderate pruning, about 60%. But here also we can see the photos. This is non-pruned plants and different levels of pruning. And also you can see that there is a reduction in sunburn and diseases. So let's talk about now about the most challenge for growers on dragon fruit production. So we're going to talk about specifically the effect of pruning on the stem and fruit canker control, because according to this paper on 2020, this is the most prevalent and destructive disease in South Florida. So this disease is caused by Neositalidium dimidiatum. And as you might be familiar with the symptoms, the pathogen can infect even the stems and fruits. And the first symptoms characterization is this chlorotic flecks that can have this reddish center. And then under certain climate conditions, the pathogen can cause these necrotic lesions, also known by canker. And in a later stage of the disease, the tissue get macerate and dry out and cause these shut hole symptoms. And it's important to mention that even fruits and new growths are more susceptible to the disease compared to the mature cladodes. So because this disease become a major challenge for growers worldwide and even in South Florida, our team, led by Dr. Zhang, established a project that the main goal is to develop integrated disease management for this disease. So we try varieties to see if there is some resistant varieties to promote canker control. And also we test conventional and organic fungicide. Romina might you speak about this topic. And also we try cultural practice for pruning. And this is my major talk today, talk about pruning. So before we establish a disease management, we need to understand about the life cycle of the pathogen and the biology of the pathogen, because then we can know when is the exactly time for controlling this disease. So for instance, the pathogen is there in the infected cladodes, and if you don't prune your plants, the pathogen will survive and overwinters and cause disease in the new growing season. But also, if you prune your plants and you let the plant debris in the ground, the pathogen also can overwinter in the top of the lesions, and under favorable climate conditions, they also can cause new disease in the new growing season. So as the pathogen infect the new tissues, they will cause these lesions, and as you might observe, you can observe these black small dots here, that in the microscope is this structure here. And inside the structure here is a production of millions and tons of what we call spores. That is the infective part of the pathogen. And this spore can be transported for new tissues by water splash or rain associated with wind, causing infections in the fruit and the new stems. And this cycle here can be speed if you have high temperature that we have in Florida for sure, and rain, because facilitate the pathogen dispersion. So how can we avoid this cycle here? How can we avoid disease outbreaks here, or reduce the speed of this cycle and less infection? So we need to take action early in the season. So to stop the cycle, we need to provide a winter pruning to reduce the disease pressure for the next season. And also don't forget to remove the plant debris from the ground. But what happens if we delay the stem canker control? If you don't take early action, what's gonna happen? So as you know, stem is the major source of inoculum to infect fruits. So that means if you have a high stem canker intensity in the beginning of the season, this means that you also have more chance of fruit infections. So it's why we need to, if you want to safeguard your fruit, we need to control the stem canker first. And it's why it's important to use pruning as preventive measure, because as you know here, sometimes you have not much lesion, but you can see a high infection in the fruit. So never minimize the power of this one infection to cause a disease. One lesion to cause a disease. So for example, the lesion, the pathogen can be there and can be carried out by the rain and infect the fruit. So this is an example of active lesions when they have these black dots. So don't overestimate this lesion, because the pathogen can produce millions and tons of spores. So it's why it's important to prune your plants early in the season, because if you try to use fungicides you work better preventively. So they have less action curatively or eradicative. So you might not kill the pathogen 100%. So it's why pruning is important. Also, I wanted to emphasize, as you might be familiar with the symptoms, that the new growths can be heavily infected and faster, and this also can serve a source of inoculum for fruits. So I also recommend to constantly remove these new growths highly infected. So when is the best time of pruning? I would say all year round, but we have two main periods that is more important, because then pruning you act as preventive measure. So the first of period is between November and January, during the dry season after the last harvest. This is the best time to remove damage, infected stems, weak stems, rotten, and sunburn damaged stems. And don't forget to protect wounds, because when you cut the clados, you open these wounds and you facilitate other infections. So I would use, for example, a copper-based product. The second period that is more important to you carry out the pruning is between February, April, before the flowering, removing this intensive growth, highly infect. And this also is the most important period to you start your fungicide applications as preventive treatment. I would be caution when pruning during May to October, because this is the rain season. So instead you are controlling the disease by pruning, you're stimulating new infection, because the wounds that you might cause. So also you cannot apply copper-based product in this, because they will be washed off, and also you have fruits, so can cause toxicity to the fruits. So you can provide, for example, biological products application for you protect your pruning, your wounds. And don't forget to sanitize your pruning tools, because when you use, you don't sanitize to prune one plant to another, you'll be carrying out the pathogen and stimulating new infection. Sorry. So we know that prunings have a lot of benefits, but we need a concrete information how pruning can be beneficial in the aspect of canker control. We need some numbers to provide this for growers. So we established a field experiment in 2 commercial locations here in South Florida, where it tests pruned plants and non-pruned plants. And the pruning level was established by the growers, the local growers, and was about 30 to 50%. And here is this result is actually already published. So we provide the winter pruning in the both location around middle of October on 2022. And then we evaluated the disease all year round until June of 2023. That was the first production cycle. And as you see in the both graphs, so the dots lines are the pruned plants, and the squared is the non-pruned plants. And you can see the reduction on the disease, this in terms of stem canker. So you can see that pruning can actually reduce the disease. So let's talk about numbers. How much control I can have? What's the pruning effectiveness? So for stem canker, we have effectiveness around 70% in both locations. But for fruit canker control, we have effectiveness around 40 to 50%. I need to remember you that fruit is more susceptible to infection, so it's more difficult to control. So it's better you always do the preventive control. So also, are you not expected that pruning would have 100% of effectiveness? Because pruning is just a tool that needs to be integrated with another strategies, because this disease is just, we can control the disease efficiently if you have integrated disease management. So pruning in this case is just a piece of the puzzle. So as I mentioned before, here is the pruning the debris. So I would recommend to remove and destroy this plant debris from the ground, because I mentioned before, it's like if you see in the morning this debris, you'll be very humid in a lot of lesions. This is perfect for the pathogen to overwinters there and cause new diseases. So I know that in big areas, maybe removing these stems from the ground, you will involve a lot of workload. So another practice that you can consider is to stimulate the decomposition of this debris. So you can cutting or using the mowing to cut in small pieces to accelerate the decomposition, or you might consider using also products, for example, quaternary ammonia or copper, but copper I would be aware because can cause soil toxicity. So I mentioned all the benefits of pruning. I proved to you that it's a very important management strategy to manage canker control, but we need to be patient while you're doing pruning. So here's some tips for growers. So avoid over pruning, because when you have this excessive pruning, also you stress the plant and delay your fruiting. Also pruning during cooler periods, for example, early in the morning or late afternoon, to minimize this stress on plants. And remember that when you prune during the rainy season, you encourage new infections. So I will take care on these periods to always sanitize your tools and protect the wounds, and remove the destroyed infected plant debris because they are source of inoculum and of the disease. Always also disinfect your pruning tools. You can use bleach solution of 10%, hydrogen peroxide between 3 to 6%, or alcohol 70%. You can let in a solution, for example, for 1 to 5 minutes. And always protect the wounds. So during the dry season, you can use copper-based fungicide, and during the rainy season, you can use biological fungicides. So as I mentioned before, to reach the maximum disease control, we need to integrate our tools that we have. Fungicides is important, but we need to always think preventively to control the disease. So cultural control will be the base for you have a successful control of the disease. So pruning and remove plant infected debris is the major must to do tool for this disease. And this is my last message. So it's better to prevent than to regret, because when you attempt to start a plantation for highly diseased and unproductive condition, can be almost impossible and very costly. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Pam. Very nice job. So our next speaker will be Romina Gazis. And she's going to be talking about current disease control recommendations. for dragon fruit.
Right. Pam, can you stop sharing?
Sharing is caring. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, she's caring a lot.
I still share. Ah, okay.
Yeah, you have to stop.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Let me see. Okay. Okay, can you guys see the full screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. So, hello everyone. I'm Romina Aziz. I'm a plant pathologist at the Tropical Research and Education Center. I'm also the director of the plant clinic. So I am the one that will take your disease samples. If you are ever in doubt, if it's is insect damage or a pest damage or a disease or disorder caused by abiotic factors, please send us a sample and we can identify what's the problem so we can go ahead with the disease control recommendations. And so today I'm gonna give you a brief overview of some of the important and more critical disease control strategies that we have currently as recommendations. So while stem and fruit canker is the most important disease currently, not only in South Florida, but in any region that there is high humidity and warm temperatures year around. Stem and fruit canker is the most important one. However, there are other diseases, there are other pathogens out there. This is a list of pathogens that have been reported as affecting dragon fruit commercial production worldwide. They are updated to last year. And you can see in green the ones that are present in South Florida. By present, I mean that they have been formally reported. So there is a peer review publication out there that have reported this disease affecting production here in Florida. Now, there are other ones, like you see here in yellow or orange, that we know they are around, but we have see them seldomly. And so we still have to do the work. We still have to do the Koch postulates. We still have to prove that these pathogens are causing disease and they are not just a secondary infection or acting as saprotrophs. And so there's a lot more research to do, but so far we have a lot of them. So, you know, there are few diseases that we have to take care of. And so since I only have 20 minutes, I'm gonna concentrate in stem and fruit canker. Just as Pam mentioned, this is one of the most important diseases and it's pretty insidious and very complex to manage. It's very aggressive, it's well established in our area, and so it's very difficult to manage. So I'm gonna concentrate in this disease. But there are others, like this bipolaris fruit rot. Sometimes we see outbreaks of this disease every 3-4 years. So that's one to keep an eye as well, because it can clearly, as you can see in the photos, compromise the quality of the fruit. And of course, the viral infections. I would say that 90% of the vines here in South Florida are infected with viruses, but we still don't have a good grasp of what's the consequence of these infections. So we don't have real data on affecting yielding or quality. We just, of course, would like to have free of pathogens vines. And as you can see in these photos, it could, you see the chlorosis, right? So we could assume that it's causing a reduction of photosynthesis, but so far, I just want to mention that we don't have concrete data on what's the effect on yielding and fruit quality of virus infections. And as Pam really nicely put it, we need to follow an integrated management strategy, which means that you have to use multiple strategies in order to reduce the effect of diseases in the field. So we have to use cultural practices. You already mentioned pruning and sanitation. But we also can moderate and use appropriate irrigation systems to reduce disease pressure, use appropriate spacing of plants, and of course, a good fertilization program to maintain the vigor on those vines and make them more tolerant to diseases and pests. We have the chemical group of management strategies, which is using efficacious compounds and considering the crop's phenology and having an appropriate rotation of active ingredients. And this is important because we don't want to induce resistance towards some of these key active ingredients that we are using. We don't want to induce resistance towards those modes of actions in our local pathogen populations. Then we can also use biologicals, which means that we can use natural enemies or biological control agents to suppress population of pathogens. And the key word here is suppress. We cannot use biologicals to eliminate, eradicate, or even cure disease or eradicate pathogens. This is to suppress their populations. And of course, if there is the availability of resistant or tolerant varieties out there, that would be a very good strategy that we can integrate in this IPM program. And so today we're going to focus on the cultural practices. Pam already went through the pruning, but I have more tips on how to use cultural practices to reduce and mitigate the effect of diseases in the field. We're going to cover chemical management. Unfortunately, there is no efficacy data on biologicals and their performance in the field. That's something that is a knowledge gap that we should do research on to see if we can give better recommendations to growers with science-based information on the efficacy of these biologicals. And genetics, Dr. Schwan Lab and others, including Dr. Crane and myself, we are working towards screening some of the varieties that we grow here locally and evaluate how they respond toward some of the diseases, especially stem and fruit canker. So hopefully for the next workshop, we have some information on susceptibility of the varieties that we have available. And so number one tip and recommendation is, of course, to start with clean material. And this is a preventative measure. This is especially important for crops that are propagated through cuttings. And we all know that dragon fruit is one of them. The growers themselves propagate their crops either because they are replacing plants or because they are increasing their acreage. They use cuttings, right? And they propagate themselves these cuttings. So we need to make cuttings, number one, from healthy mother plants. So it's good that you observe the vine that you are going to propagate and take cuttings from clean material. Then you need to root those cuttings to make them vigorous before you put them into the field. And of course, if those cuttings get infected while they were being propagated, like you can see here in this photo, these cuttings under a shade house, you can see that some of the stems are already infected. Of course, do not plant those in the field. Then check for root pathogens, because even though in South Florida we do have well-drained soil, there are some areas that suffer from flooding. And if you are growing dragon fruit a little bit north of Miami-Dade County, there's some sand in the soil. And so that is a good environment for Phytophthora and other root pathogens, including or pathogenic organisms, including nematodes. And so before you put these cuttings, rooted cuttings into the field, it's good that you observe the roots and see that they are not discolored, that they are not rotted, because you will be putting into the field already compromised material. So, you know, you're going to waste, the plant probably is going to die, and you're going to waste more resources in trying to bring it back to health once it's in the field, and you have the risk of contaminating the other plants and the substrate, the soil that it was already there. Phytophthora is very common in nurseries. It really loves to be in containers. And so I would really encourage you to look at the roots before you put those plants into the field. And then, of course, if it's possible, screen the mother plant for the presence of viruses. So that's a little bit complicated. It needs testing to confirm the presence of viruses in cuttings. And that usually requires molecular testing, which could be expensive. But you can see the symptoms, right? There will be a chance that the plant is asymptomatic, but if you are seeing mosaic symptoms, ring spot symptoms, you know, those are definitely not okay to be propagated. So maybe you won't be able to send a sample to a lab to get a screen, but at least look at the symptoms, check the plants, look for mosaic symptoms and ring spots, and don't propagate those. So the second strategy is sanitation and proper pruning before and during production season. So Pam gave an amazing presentation, give you really concrete science-based evidence that pruning helps. We have the data, we are showing you the data. Yes, it's laborious, but it's really worth doing that strategy. Now, she also mentioned about sanitation of the pruning tools when you go from plant to plant or from field to field, but also about removing those cuttings from the field out, right? If you leave those infected material next to your plants, you are just piling and piling disease material and inoculum. So definitely with the rain splash and with the overhead irrigation, that fungus that is living in that debris is going to jump into healthy stems or into developing fruit. Now, there is another sanitation practice, another that is not pruning, but is the removal of floral parts. And here you can see here where you see the photo with the red arrow, you can see the parts of the flower, the fruit has already set, and you can see those lesions on the petals. And then you can see the photo next to it with completely colonized floral parts by this fungus. And this in particular is by Polaris fruit rot. And you can see the symptoms are large, rounded necrotic lesions on the fruit, very aggressive. And it's highly contagious. So here you can see the floral parts, all that brown, powdery substance growing on those floral parts. Those are millions of billions of spores. And here you can see how I collected it from the field. You can see how my hand is all covered in that brown powder, which are millions of spores that you can see here in this microscope. So by removing this floral part, you are taking out from the field millions of spores. Again, this is laborious because each vine puts many, many flowers and many, many fruits. But again, I have seen growers already doing it here in South Florida, and they have told me that the disease has decreased quite a bit. So it's also a good strategy, cultural practice to implement. Now, avoid overcrowding of plants and dense canopies. This is very related and goes side to side with what Pamela was talking about pruning. One of the good things about pruning is that you're going to reduce crowding, and you're gonna increase airflow, and you are gonna reduce the free water that is on the stems, and you're going to improve also the coverage of your sprays because you have less material. And she already mentioned about productivity is not going to go down if you prune properly. And so don't be afraid of having less yield. You're still going to have productive stems, and more importantly, you're going to have number one fruit, grade number one, which are the ones that bring the money. One of the good things about pruning, one of the advantages of pruning is to reduce the free water that accumulates on top of the stems. You can see here in this photo, those free water droplets, and also dragon fruit is very hydrophobic, right? The peel of the stems is very hydrophobic. So it accumulates all this water as droplets. And that's perfect situation, perfect context for fungal spores that are everywhere. They're always airborne, flying around all the time. And as soon as they land on top of this stem and they find free water, they will germinate. So fungi need at least 6 hours of free water to germinate. So if you reduce the canopy, if you do proper pruning, you are gonna increment airflow. So those droplets are gonna evaporate easy, and you're gonna avoid this situation in which any fungal spore can land and then germinate and infect the tissue. So of course, we cannot, if it rains, you're gonna have it, but if you have overhead irrigation, that's also something that you could avoid. Better to have sprinkles, micro sprinkles, or drip irrigation so you avoid this free water. Now, chemicals. We all want to know what can we spray to manage diseases. And so, as I mentioned before, there are several fungal diseases affecting dragon fruit. I'm gonna give general recommendations for fungal diseases. So each ingredient, each active ingredient will work better on a specific group of fungi. However, most of them will work in general, right? Most of the ones that I'm going to mention are going to work towards different diseases. Maybe there will be more efficacious on some than others, but in general, you can assume that they will work for all fungal diseases above ground. So this is the list of registered fungicides. These are the ones that you can legally use. Now, you can see here, there's two sections. You have the conventional, which are synthetic fungicides. We have azoxystrobin, which is in the FRAC group 11. And then we have Switch and other brand names that are a combination of cyprodenyl and fludeoxonil. Now, you also have some products that are independent. They have either a group 9 or a group 12. So it could be alone cyprodenyl or alone fludeoxonil. But in any case, we have only 3 synthetic active ingredients to use to manage diseases. Then we also have phosphoric acid, which is group 33, but those are for Phytophthora, which are not true fungi, but oomycetes. Sometimes people call them fungal-like organisms. So in this case, I want to make the difference, right? Phosphoric acid works really good for oomycetes, including Phytophthora. And then you cannot use the fungicides that are recommended for true fungi for this group of organisms. Then we also have copper-based products, as it was mentioned before. And that can be, depending on the formulation, that can be used in conventional or in organic production. And then we have a bunch of registered contact disinfectants. Be careful with those because they could induce phytotoxicity if you use them when it's really hot or when you have direct sunlight, you can have phytotoxicity on the fruit or on stems, so be careful with those. And then we have disease suppressants. We have some botanicals, we have some essential oils, and we have some biological controls like this streptomyces. So I just want to say that these products that are organic, like essential oil products and other alike, those have not been tested for efficacy and crop safety. So because they don't need to be tested, to be registered, or to be available for purchase, I cannot really tell you, oh, cinnamon essential oil works, because even though they are listed to be used in dragon fruit production, I don't have science-based data to tell you that they work. Okay, so this is the crop phenology of the the production cycle here in South Florida. It's a long season, as you can see here. You can see the calendar year. We have only included 48 weeks, but you can see that the first flowers are seen mid-March to the end of March, and then the first fruits are seen during May. And so then once the vines start flowering and setting fruit, you have several waves, 3, 4, sometimes 5 of cycles of flowering and fruit, flowering and fruit. Sometimes you have, a lot of times actually, you have flowers and fruits at the same time, which complicates the management, right? As I mentioned before, we only have 2 active ingredients. 3 active ingredients, and some products have 2 of them together. So there are 36 critical weeks to cover that we need to use not only cultural practices, but also fungicides, because we want that fruit to be clean. And so here I have the recommendations that we currently have. Chemical and cultural management should be applied during the flowering and fruiting season. Cultural management, the pruning is done before, as Pam mentioned, but you also can remove the flower parts that are infected with fungi, and you also can cut some of the very infected stems during the production season. And so if we follow the label, which we should, the label says that these products can only be used, azoxystrobin can only be used 5 times in a year. And switch, or any trademark that has those 2 products, fludeoxonil and cyprodenil, you can only use 4 times. So now you have only 9 times that you can use these products, right? So let's say that we plan a 14-day interval, which I know it's hard to do, because here in South Florida, the disease pressure is so high. We have production season during the rainy season. So, we must use a sticker or an adjuvant. But even so, even if we use these adjuvants, the rain sometimes washes off these fungicides. But let's say that we use a 2-week interval, we still have, we can only protect 18 weeks. And so we still have many weeks, up to 5 months without protection. So this is a clear sign that we need more chemicals to incorporate in a rotation, right? Because even if we rotate these products and following the label as we should, we have up to 5 months of unprotected production, which is not okay. And so we have this program. It's a wonderful program called IR4. And this is a federal program that researchers research and obtains EPA approval for pesticides used on minor crops. And how it works is that this program will assign pesticide trials to the university, or sometimes to growers directly, or companies. But my lab and Dr. Crane's lab do run a lot of these pesticide trials for fungicides, bactericides, or anything disease related. And we do tests for efficacy and crop safety. So efficacy is how good the product is for that disease, right? Is it controlling the disease enough to be proposed to be registered for that crop? And very important, crop safety, because we don't want to recommend something that then is going to burn the fruit and is really going to hurt the grower and the vines. And so we need to take care of those two aspects, efficacy and crop safety. And so these trials are informed by the needs of the stakeholders. So you, as a stakeholder, can go to the website of IR4 and say, I need more products. And perhaps you are already doing your own experiments in your field, are testing some unlabeled products. You can, don't be afraid. You can call me and say, hey, Romina, I'm using this product and it's giving me amazing results. I would like to propose a trial with this product. So IR4 really values the input from growers. So if you have recommendations for me to propose directly, or you can propose to them directly, we can run those trials. So for a pesticide to be registered for a new crop, it takes a long time, up to 4 years and sometimes longer. Things are becoming more difficult. EPA is becoming more strict on the pesticides that we can put out there in the environment. And so I would say to start right away. Today is the day that you can go and propose these trials. And so there is a long pathway for registration, but starts with a request to IR4. And then we have to run the efficacy and crop safety trials. They have to be done in 2 years. You cannot have data from only 1 year. You need 2 years. Sometimes you need multiple states to be involved in these trials. Then we send the reports. Then they evaluate the reports and see if the efficacy is enough to propose a registration. And then we have to do residue trials to be sure that these compounds are not being accumulated in the edible part of the fruit or can damage the ecosystem, so the soil health and the environment. After all these hoops, we may be able to convince the chemical company to add dragon fruit or other minor crop to their labels. And so we have been working on this quite hard for the last years. My lab, in collaboration with IR4 and Dr. Crane, have tested several compounds. Tilt, which is propiconazole, and a different FRAC than the ones that are already registered, a FRAC3. Luna Sensation, which is a combination of FRAC7 and FRAC11, were tested 2 years in a row. And we have good data. We have submitted the reports. Now they are being evaluated. We have shown that these are efficacious compounds, and they are being just process the data to see if they will go ahead with the registration. Now, last year, we did a lot of research, and this was also in collaboration with Dr. San and Pamela. And we tested 5 products, and this is how it goes. So first of all, we need to include a control. Control means that the plant is sprayed with water, and we include the adjuvant, right? Because sometimes some adjuvants do have some pathogen control. In this case, we use new film. And you can see here in pink is the control. So that means those were vines that were sprayed with water. Then the orange one is Abound, which is the standard. That means that is the registered compound. Then we have Omega. That's one of the test substance, and that's fluacinam, FRAC29, very different FRAC than the other ones. Aureus, which is tebuconazole, that will be kind of similar to Tilt, which we already tested, and that's a FRAC3. We have Cannonball, which is fludeoxonil. And then we have Provisol, which is a very different group, menfentrifluconazole, FRAC3. And then we have proprietary compound. We don't know what it is, but the company give us the money for the trial, and this is in gray. So then we evaluated several aspects. I'm not showing all the data. We have data for stems as well. But since fruit is the most important part of the crop, I'm only showing the fruit data. And so we then evaluated the hundreds and hundreds of fruits from these vines and classified them in scale 1, which means grade fruit number 1, which is the most desirable one, clean fruit, all the way to scale 5 that, you just trash, of course, that fruit. And so you can see here that the standard did better than the control and did the same as Oreos and Cannonball. But Omega, Fluacinam, and Provisol menfentrifuconazole did very well. Most of the fruit was in scale 1. So that's great news, great news. In an ideal world, all these tested substances that have shown efficacy will be registered for use, right? And in an ideal world, we will have those very soon, and we can implement them and cover those 5 months of unprotected production, right? And we can even put them into rotation with the already registered compounds. The ones that work the best, of course, we will use them when disease pressure is high, which is during the rainy season. And it will be really good to have those registered so we can cover and maybe even have less shorter intervals in between sprays. Again, these are not registered yet, so you cannot go and use them, but just want to give you a hopeful message. Even if we have these available, remember, coverage is very important. And it was mentioned before, when you do proper pruning, you're going to increase the coverage because the spray is going to hit more of the productive clados. To begin with, dragon fruit is a rare plant, right? The anatomy of the clados is already challenging for to have a good coverage because of the shape of it. So to begin with, we are dealing with a challenging crop. So be sure that all the nozzles work. Be sure that the size of the droplets are correct and that you are having a good coverage of the sprays. The use of adjuvant is quite important, very, very important. As I mentioned before, the peel of the stems is highly hydrophobic. And here we did a test in the lab. We put a dye on the water that we use. And you can see here how the droplets are really large, uneven, and it drips away. So if you don't use an adjuvant, it does not stick to the clado. And so it's going to drip out of the vine. You don't see it because you don't use a dye in the water, right? But we can see here in the photo. Now we compare clean and new film. They're both surfactants, non-ionic, but you can see the one work better than the other one, right? New film work really well. You can see how tiny are those droplets, and there's no dripping out of the clados. So I would really recommend you to add new film. And we also tested different dosage, and you can see how the droplets change with the amount of new film that we use. And with that, thank you to all my collaborators. Thank you to my lab. Thank you to the agencies that support research on dragon fruit. I still believe it's a viable crop. It's a valuable fruit. So we should all work together towards getting this disease under control. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Romina. Excellent job, as always. Our next speaker is Daniel Carrillo. He's going to be talking about insect pests and beneficials for dragon fruit. Dr. Carrillo.
Thank you. Let me share my presentation. Let's see. Is it working?
See it? It's not full yet.
Hmm.
We still see the tools on the left.
Hmm. 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 Yeah. Hmm.
That's better. We see stuff around the perimeter, but it's good enough.
Give me 1 second. Let me see. Let me try with a PowerPoint, maybe. This one. It's good enough? You think?
And it says that's a PDF. He knows Anna. He practiced with it as a PDF.
How's that? Better?
It's better. It's good enough, I think.
Yeah, for some reason it's not.
She says maybe in full screen? Question mark? Smiley face? This is gonna go great.
Let me do it again. Sorry, 1 second.
Speaking of YouTube, I'm recording this and this will be on YouTube.
Let's see. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, to tell you the truth. Well, I can start talking while we solve this. My name is Daniel Carrillo. I'm a tropical fruit entomologist here at TREC. And all the presentation and all the information that's contained in the presentation is available in a EDIS publication. If you search dragon fruit pests in Florida, you will easily find it. Let's see, 1 second. I'm gonna try something different.
If you can go forward, it's fine. People in the
Yeah.
chat are saying it's fine.
Okay. So I'm gonna continue with this one. One first comment that I want to make is very important, is that all the insects that affect dragon fruit in Florida are generalist insects that are affecting other crops and that were here before even dragon fruit cultivation started in Florida, that they happen to feed on dragon fruit. There's no pest that is specific to dragon fruit. So this is quite important because you really need to understand what's around you. The pests are coming from outside always. So if you're close to a vegetable field or to a nursery or another tropical fruit grove, and this is essential for you to understand the pest pressure and what pests are you going to be dealing with. Another important consideration is that we have even less insecticides registered than fungicides. So you cannot rely on chemical control. This is when really integrated pest management is more important, and specifically monitoring. You really want to detect the pests early when the populations are low, when they are easy to control, because you don't have any pesticide to really knock large populations down. And this is something that is always recommended, monitoring. Everybody talks about monitoring, but not very often practiced. And it's not that difficult here. Easy proposal here is to inspect 20 vines per acre and use, there are different options, patterns that you can use to cover the majority of the area. and inspect those 20 vines, different parts of the vines, different the flowers, the clados, the fruit, and record what you see. You need to familiarize yourself with the pests and record them. Record that information so you have some historic data and you understand which are the most critical problems and you can better prepare for them. So if you do this, you are likely gonna be able to detect the pest issues early when they are easy to control. Um, Controlling an outbreak of a pest in dragon fruit is very complicated without an efficient chemistry. We are also working with IR4. We have several insecticides on the pipeline, but I'm not going to mention that they're not legally available to be used right now. It's going to take some years. There's only a few that I'm going to mention here. But again, chemical control is not your strategy to use on dragon fruit production. The most important pest by far are thrips. These are tiny insects. They have rasping, sucking mouth parts. So what they do is that they scrape the surface of the fruit, also the flowers, and they scratch it and then mush that tissue and then suck it. Usually they infest the tender tissue, so the growing tissue, and as it expands, you see the damage. There's this major scars. The most critical period for controlling and for monitoring these thrips is when you have closed and open flowers. I will talk about that later. And these thrips are not always present. And some years we have very low incidence of the thrips, but in 2015 we had an outbreak and it damaged almost 80% of the fruit. Since then we haven't had like these major losses, but it's possible that they can show up anytime. Like this year, I've seen outbreaks of thrips on passion fruit. Guavas also have some problems. So this year is looking is concerning regarding thrip species. I'm going to mention some research that we did on monitoring of these thrips. It's an experiment conducted by a student a couple of years ago using three methods: sticky cards of different colors, also pan traps, and directly sampling flowers and fruit in different stages. No, the flower buds, then the flower already formed, but before it opens, the open flower, then the fruit in the first stages when the flower drops, and the fully formed fruit. And using those monitoring tools, we identified 10 species of thrips. Some that are very common, this Frankinella bispinosa, very common here in the area. It affects different fruit crops. The western flower thrips, Frankinella occidentalis, chili thrips, thrips palmi, that are very common in different crops here in Florida. And as you can see, they're easily trapped with the different colors. The most common one is this Frankinella bispinosa. It's a very common thrips. It's represented here with the blue bars. But interestingly, when we scouted the different stages of the flowers, we found that these two stages, when the flower is before it opens and when the flower is open, are the two most susceptible to thrips damage. And even though we found 10 species infesting the flowers, at this stage, that is the critical stage when they really cause damage, found that 92% of the species of the individuals that we capture were chili thrips, Scirtothrips dorsalis. This is an invasive thrips that is a pest of several vegetables. And this is the one that really was causing the damage. This is different from other thrip species in that it pupates on the plant. Most of the other thrip species, they drop and pupate in the soil. This one completes the cycle entirely on the plants. We also found the western flower thrips attacking the flowers, but primarily the issues with these chili thrips. So now we know that many thrip species can be captured in traps, but chili thrips is primarily causing the damage. Of course, this can change. Recently, we got a new invasive thrips in the area. It's called Thrips parvispinus. So far, we haven't seen it infesting dragon fruit, but we have seen it infesting other fruit crops. So these thrips, the situation with the thrips is dynamic, but chili thrips for sure is an important species. So we know that blue sticky cards and pan traps are attractive to many thrip species. Unfortunately, chili thrips are not very attractive to these traps. So it's useful to use these traps because they give you an idea of more or less how are the thrips populations in general, but it's not a good indication for specifically for the chili thrips. For the chili thrips, it's important to monitor the flowers. That's stage 2 before the flower opens and when the flowers open. These are the most important to be scouting for and inspect visually. If you see thrips attacking these 2 stages of the flower development, you really need to do something. So for thrips management, again, be prepared to look at those stages of the flower and protect them if you see thrips infesting them. There are multiple biological control agents that have been widely used against these thrips. They have not been tested in dragon fruit systems, but it's an option, and it's something that moving forward we need to consider. Something that is quite important is the cultural control. Like I said, you need to be aware of the environment. Don't think only on the dragon fruit plant. The weeds, especially weeds that have flowers, can be hosts for these thrips. So weed control is important. Then you need to avoid water stress and balance your nutritional program. Don't overuse of pesticides, of fertilizers, induce problems with thrips. The same as water stress. So it's quite important to have some good irrigation practices and also fertilization practices. In terms of chemical control, we only have one conventional pesticide registered for it. The active ingredient is spinetoram. It's a very good product. The commercial product is, the name is Delegate. But it's the only one available. And thrips are known for their ability to develop resistance to these insecticides. So if you use this repeatedly, you will ruin the product very quickly. So there are other alternatives, mostly essential oils um, and mineral oils that again they can provide some intermediate efficacy. They have not been tested. There's a plan to test this. We have a grant written that has this specifically as one of the objectives to be able to use them in a rotation where it's spinosaurum. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we have other products in the pipeline, but they're still not available for use on dragon fruit. So the thrips by far the biggest problem. We have other issues that can be considered minor in relation to the threat that the thrips pose. The leaf-footed bugs are quite important, and I mention them here because they are pests of dragon fruit in other parts of the world. In Central America and South America, these are major problems in dragon fruit production. These are sap-sucking insects. They have this stylet that they use to pierce primarily the fruit. They cause wounds that later become the entry for several pathogens, like the ones that Romina mentioned. There are big insects. They are not abundant insects. You are not going to see them frequently. But they are conspicuous when you see them. They are large and they are loud. When they fly, they make this buzz that is easy to identify. They oviposit on weeds, on grasses. They put this like color of eggs that if you find this in your orchard, it's an indication that you have these leaf-footed bugs. Like I said, they are not abundant, but one insect can cause a lot of damage and go vine by vine and damage a lot of fruit. If you see them, try to catch them and physically crush them. That could be effective because, again, they're not abundant, but a few insects can cause a lot of damage. Chemical control, there's nothing available right now, but it's possible to use kaolin clay if you have an outbreak of these insects. We haven't seen this in Florida so far, but in other areas it's present. And it's also possible to use repellents, but it hasn't been necessary in Florida so far. Other insects that are important, aphids. We have several species. These are also sap-sucking insects. And usually we found them feeding and forming colonies on flowers, like you see here in this picture. And the flowers themselves, they secrete sugars, but when they have aphids, they produce even more sugars, and they produce honeydew and induce sooty mold. It is black fungus that stains the fruit. It really doesn't damage, doesn't cause a lot of damage, but it stains the fruit and it's difficult to clean and sometimes ruins the commercial value of the fruit. Usually associated with flowers, and we also have good biological control with parasitoids and predators generally, but this natural control can be disrupted by ants. Perhaps you have seen ants are also very common in dragon fruit orchards. These ants love this sugar and those secretions that the aphids have. So the ants tend to protect the aphids and exclude these biological control agents. So sometimes if you have problems with aphids, it's important to manage the ants. And for managing ants, there are a couple more options than the conventional pesticides. For the aphids, it's also the cultural control, mostly fertilization. You need to really have a balanced nutrition. If you have an excess of nitrogen, that induces problems with aphids. Another problem that has increased in the recent years is with the mealybugs. We have a couple of species that are problematic. They are also sap-sucking insects, and they are difficult to control because they tend to form these aggregations. And sometimes you can kill the mother, but the mother is usually protecting some big egg masses. So you can kill the mother, but the eggs and the young nymphs are still down protected by this mass of wax that the aphids that the mealybugs produce. They also produce honeydew and induce sooty mold. And this can infest the fruit, but they also infest different parts of the plant. And if you let the population grow, it can be quite difficult to control because of this same problem that Romina mentioned about the architecture of the plant. They like to hide and establish colonies in areas that are difficult to control with sprays. This can also be controlled through pruning, but again, you need to detect the infestations early, and by removing them through pruning, you can easily control them. If you have a large infestation, then it's quite difficult to control. Generally, these mealybugs are naturally controlled with parasitoids and predators. However, there's a problem with what we call hyperparasitoids. So parasitoids of the parasitoids. Usually, these parasitoids control regularly the mealybugs, but every once in a while, every 4 or 5 years, we have the occurrence of these hyperparasitoids that interfere with biological control. And this has been observed in other crops, and we can assume that in dragon fruit it also occurs, but this is something that needs further investigation. Same problem as with the aphids. They have this association with the ants. The ants love these secretions, these sugars. So it's important to manage the ants if you want to control the mealybugs. And same as with aphids, an excess of nitrogen fertilization also induces problems with these mealybugs. We've also seen some problems with armyworms, usually in groves that are next to vegetable fields. This Spodoptera exigua, the beet armyworm, is a pest of vegetables, and they sometimes move to the dragon fruit and feed on the flowers, as you can see here. And they can damage the flowers. So if you're in proximity to a vegetable field, you need to be alert on this. There is one weed in this red root pigweed that is the main host of these armyworms. So also you need to monitor for the presence of this in your field, but also in adjacent fields if you have problems with this. Hasn't been like a huge problem, but we have seen it in a couple of orchards. If it becomes problematic, there are pheromones available for monitoring and even for mating disruption. And they can be controlled biologically with Bacillus thuringiensis dipel. This is a bacteria that can control the larvae. Scales, also quite common. This cactus scale, sometimes they build up populations and cover the stems completely. They're similar to the aphids and mealybugs. They have subsopping mouth parts. It could be quite problematic. They can cover the trunk and the stems. The same problem as the aphids and the mealybugs. They usually have parasitoids and predators that control them, but they are protected by ants. So this can be controlled through sanitation. So following the same recommendations that Pamela presented, include this in your program. If you're going to be pruning for controlling fungal diseases, be conscious that if you have scales, it's a good idea to also remove them. As, again, excessive nitrogen fertilization induces these problems. More recently, we have seen also problems with weevils, only in a few orchards, diapurpose root weevils. These are pests of citrus and of other fruit crops, but they are only found in very specific areas. Here in Homestead, we have some infestations and near Biscayne, the Biscayne Bay area. A couple of areas that have they have traditionally been infested with these weevils, and they attack not only dragon fruit but a bunch of plants. So if you have an orchard in that area, you probably will have problems with these weevils. The larvae feed on the roots and other plant parts, and it's the weevils that they tend to aggregate and mate and feed on the flowers and also on the fruit. Usually they're coming from somewhere else. The weevils have this movement. They probably infest trees, the roots of the trees in some other in nearby areas, and then they come to feed on the dragon fruit flowers. So you need to identify that source and probably control the weevils in the source, because they will keep on coming. Deterrence, it's potentially an option, but use of kaolin clays, it might be an option. But again, this is very limited. We have only seen them in one orchard so far. Also termites. We got some samples with termites that are native to Florida. And they tend to feed on the tissue, and they are probably feeding on the dragon fruit because there's nothing else around them. We shouldn't be concerned too much about them becoming like major pests of dragon fruit, but we have seen a couple of cases. So they are probably foraging and looking for more substantial food sources for them. But it's possible to find them attacking the base of the plants, as you can see here. Now, I mentioned before this leaf-footed bug. This species, Leptoglossus sonatus, we're supposed to have it here in Florida. Most of the reports are in northern Florida. But this is a key pest in Central America, Colombia, Mexico, Ecuador, and we don't know, we haven't seen it really affecting dragon fruit in South Florida, but we need to keep an eye on this. This could become a problem, and we have populations nearby. Also, this is a pest that is specific on dragon fruit in other areas in South America. These bud flies that attack the flower buds. Well, in the genus Dasiops, really important. We don't have them here in Florida. We don't have records of them, but we really want to keep an eye on them and try to detect them early on and try to eradicate them if they are detected. But if you ever see something attacking the flowers and leaving mark holes on the flower buds, they cause excessive flower drop. So they don't let the flower progress. So this is very important to keep an eye on these flies. Also, this cactus moth, I've seen this attacking dragon fruit in the Caribbean countries. Not here in Florida yet. We have some indication that probably there was a problem near Orlando, but we didn't manage to ascertain if this was the problem. But we have a moth that is specific to cactus, and it fits on different cacti species. Mainly attacks Opuntia cacti, but it can attack dragon fruit. We haven't seen it in commercial productions, but this could become a problem for dragon fruit production. Also, very important, fruit flies, especially Bactrocera dorsalis. This is one of species that often we get introductions in Florida, and we eradicate it. But this could become a problem. If introduced in Florida, it could become a major problem for dragon fruit production. In Florida, we only have one fruit fly, that is the Caribbean fruit fly. So far, it has not been a problem for dragon fruit. But Bactrocera dorsalis or other Bactrocera species could certainly become problematic for dragon fruit production. Finally, just to point out that perhaps you have seen these sap beetles, nitidulid beetles, usually occupying flowers. We haven't seen any damage caused by these beetles, and they probably have a role as pollinators. There are other sap beetles known to pollinate cactus species in native ecosystem. So we probably see these very large numbers of these beetles occupying the flowers, but they are not pests. We often, the growers get concerned with these insects infesting or occupying the flowers, not infesting. But they don't have a detrimental effect, and they're probably beneficial. So those are the insects and damaging insects and beneficial insects. So far, we don't have major problems associated with insects in like an area wide. Only the thrips have become like really, really problematic. But as the crop grows, most likely some of these insects will become more problematic. And thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Very nice. So we will answer questions after the survey. And our next speaker is Dr. Crane. He's going to be talking about additional cultural practices to reduce insect and disease issues for dragon fruit. Dr. Crane, take it away.
You can see the screen, I hope.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I want to thank all the previous speakers. I think all the presentations were really, really good. I'm just going to briefly go through some of the practices that have already been mentioned, but really I'll try to highlight those that maybe haven't been talked about quite as much. So let's go. So one of the first things, and this is probably even more important for people who are thinking about getting into dragon fruit production, is to consider what are the environmental adaptability parameters for dragon fruit. And what I've listed here is the parameters. So for instance, the optimum temperatures for dragon fruit production, somewhere between 68 and 90 degrees. is generally best. And then extreme highs. So when you get temperatures, above 93, above 110, you'll see over in the right-hand column some comments about what can happen. And as a result of those extremely high temperatures. And the same thing, chilling temperatures, and I'll talk more about that. These are temperatures generally in the low 40s, but also include intense sunlight at the same time. And you can see that can enhance damage to the vines, which then increases the disease issues and the stress on the vine. Freezing, also freezing temperatures, so somewhere below 26 to 32. Flooding or constantly wet soils is another consideration when you're trying to figure out, can I grow dragon fruit in this particular area? And then what are some of the issues if I do? And you run into these environmental parameters, excessive environmental parameters. Same thing with drought, salinity, constant winds, of course, tropical storms or hurricanes. These are all issues that you need to consider when you are picking a site or a location, or if you're already growing dragon fruit, these are things that you need to take into consideration as what you may find as you're growing this crop and you run into salinity problems or constant winds, things like that. Just to show you, so this is freeze and chilling injury. On the left is some freeze damage. This is a red pitaya or dragon fruit. And on the right, you're seeing, and Dr. Gaziz spoke about this previously, you'll see some sunburn. And I'm just showing you temperatures here in South Dade. The red line is the low temperatures, and you can see it was going below 40 degrees for a period of time. And this is what we were seeing in the field. And so this is something that occurs when you have high sunlight and low temperatures. The sunlight actually can cause a toxicity or a phytotoxicity to the vine, killing the cells in the upper layers or those parts of the vines facing the sun. Another is drought stress, and you can see the vine, the cladode actually shrinks, becomes somewhat bony, may turn yellow, starts to fold. That can be another issue. This is, again, on the sunburn, and this is showing you sunburn out in a field. You can see the yellowing, and this sunburn increases the damage, and then if there's disease organisms around, then it makes it more susceptible to disease issues. And one thing that you may want to try doing during the winter, because it's during the winter and the fall, and even we're experiencing a little bit earlier this year, when you have these low temperatures in the 40s and you have high sunlight and you have that sunburn damage. So one thing that you may want to try, and this is before the flowering and fruit production begins, is to apply a kaolin clay-like material. Surround happens to be one brand. And the idea is to reflect that sunlight and the heat load off of the vine. I will tell you that it doesn't adhere to new growth very well, but certainly the mature parts of the vine, it can help to protect, and that's what I'm showing you here. Excessive heat, again, this is related to generally when we have cool or cold temperatures, although we have had some very high temperatures the past 2 years between the periods of June and August. And I mean, unbelievably high temperatures for this area. You're talking in, upper 90s, maybe even low hundreds here in South Florida. And this is showing you a heat signal, the lower picture there. There's also potential for damage to the fruit. And this is showing you what happens to the pulp. It becomes somewhat liquid and just shows that you can have excessive heat damage to the fruit as well. Flooding, we have not, we have had flooding here. I have been to some pitaya plantings or dragon fruit plantings where there has been a lot of wet ground between the rows. We do see people putting the vines on mounds, which is a good thing to try to keep as much of the superficial root system above any flooded waters. And also, this is from not here, obviously, but this is from a typhoon or a hurricane in 2009. And you can see there's a lot of damage. And of course, after the vines are damaged by the windstorm, a lot of diseases can move in. So some of the important parts of, again, setting up a pitaya planting or a dragon fruit planting is looking for cultivars that have disease resistance or tolerance, considering the environmental conditions I spoke about, getting clean vegetative material, whether that's from cuttings or other sources such as tissue culture. This is just showing you some preliminary data, looking at different cultivars and their susceptibility to that dragon fruit canker that we spoke about. And there's going to be more information coming from the work that our team has done. Excuse me. Primarily, Dr. Dutra is responsible for this, and Dr. Gazis. Site selection is super important, and that's what I've been talking about. You want to have the optimum range of temperatures. You want to have well-drained soils, and you want to have the drainage infrastructure. You need access to good quality water, and also wind protection may be beneficial. Why? Because if you have a lot of wind-driven soil particles, you can end up damaging the cladodes, which then opens it up to disease. And the same on the fruit. So people have spoken about this already before, but again, crowding the vines or crowding the infrastructure makes it much more difficult to not only move around the vines and take care of the vines and harvest and everything else, but also reduces the light and air, the light penetration and the air movement, which then increases the amount of diseases. And so you can see there's some recommendations on the distance between trellis rows and between the vines in the row as well. Irrigation, and this was mentioned briefly before. You know, we mainly have 4 types of irrigation here in South Florida. You have micro sprinklers, you have drip irrigation. We also have high volume, what we call under the vine irrigation systems, and high volume over the vine. Mainly the most useful ones for dragon fruit are mainly the micro sprinkler and the drip systems. And this is because not only of their efficiency of water application, but also because you're not getting the vine wet. They don't provide, the drip doesn't provide any cold protection. The micro sprinkler would provide just very limited protection if we had a significant freeze, whereas the high volume systems would be useful in a freeze event. But so far as irrigating the vines, you can use them, but you're increasing the disease incidence because you're getting the vines wet. And this is just showing you, this is a dragon fruit planting that has a high volume system or an overhead system, rainbird type system. And this orchard or grove over here, they have a microjet system. And so they're limiting the amount of the vine that's getting wet. Freeze protection. We have not had, at least in Miami-Dade County, deep South Dade, we have not had a significant freezing event in a long time. This is from Argentina, where they got down to about 22 degrees, and they were using water to protect the vines from freezing. I have to tell you, I do not know what the outcome was after the freezing event was over, but you can see they did cover the vine with ice and water. Spray patterns important. I've already mentioned this about drip and the potential for micro sprinklers to be used. And then timing. So, you know, basing the irrigation regime or the management on the plant stage of development and also the environmental conditions that you face, you know, throughout the year. Drought stress can lead to splitting of the fruit, and this is because the peel will stop growing if the fruit, the vine is drought stressed, but the pulp can continue to expand, and so you get a slug of water, and it makes the peel split. Fertilizers, my main focus on this is really to keep the material away from the very base of the vines because it can cause damage to the cladodes at the bottom of the vine. And the same thing with the organic matter. Very useful. Composts are very good for dragon fruit production. But again, you want to keep it away from directly up against the vine, the mulch. The composts, they seem to be okay. We haven't seen a problem using those and having them up against the vine, but the mulch you want to be careful about. This is just an example, shows you fertilizer and the damage to the bottom of the vine, which then opens it up to diseases. So pruning, and Pam has already talked about this. This is just a summary of it, but the pruning protocol that Dr. Dutra outlined is really critical for good disease management in dragon fruit under the conditions of South Florida, where we have, wet and rainy weather. Weed control, and that was mentioned as well, not only in relation to insects that the weeds may harbor, which then get onto the dragon fruit. They also can compete for water and nutrients with the root system that happens to be in the ground. They're also, as I said, a habitat for insect and diseases. And you can see there's different methods: ground cloth, or the use of herbicides, or mechanical removal. So control tactics, number one, whether it's an insect or a disease, you need to identify what the problem is. And you want to familiarize yourself with what they look like, and you want to scout frequently, as Dr. Carrillo was mentioning. That's a really key factor. And then you want to be aware, as he mentioned as well, of neighboring crops and environments, because insect pests can move from one field to another. So again, and you see the summary of the control tactics there. We've talked a little bit about the fungicides and the insecticides that are available. And again, their presentations give a lot of detail on how to go about using those properly. I will just mention that monitoring the weather, and everybody does, I am sure, but there are a lot of really good weather sites that have pretty good prediction of at least the day's weather with respect to rainfall, or even the next day and the next day, which may allow you to extend the time between applications, especially for a fungicide. So if it's, if the spray interval is, every 10 to 14 days, and you have continually dry weather, you may be able to extend it rather past the 10 days at closer to the 14-day interval by monitoring the weather and taking a look at it. And of course, you're out in the field looking at, the weather at your particular site. But these weather sites can give you some assistance with trying to figure out whether you should apply or not, and whether you can extend the number of days between applications. And with that, I'm going to stop